Hi, I'm Kevin Cutler with Bytable. I'll be your podcast host for this week's special edition of the Bytable podcast with guest Sarah Lloyd, recorded live from the Organization for Competitive Markets conference in Kansas City. Sarah Lloyd farms with her husband Nels Nelson on the 350-cow Nelson Dairy Farm in Wisconsin. She works off-farm as the director of special projects for the Wisconsin Farmers Union. This work includes support for community-supported agriculture farmers, organizing for fair prices for dairy farmers through the Dairy Together campaign, and research on fair labor issues in agriculture. She is also the Director of Development and the Secretary of the Board for the Wisconsin Food Hub Cooperative, which aggregates and sells fresh produce into local wholesale markets for its farmer members. Listen as we discuss the problems facing dairy producers and our rural communities, and how we can all work together towards building a better food system.
Know Better, Live Best is dedicated to supporting food and health literacy in people of all ages. Our mission is to cut through the misinformation surrounding food, health, and nutrition because we believe that when people know better, they can make the right choices and live their best lives. We are presented by Bytable Foods. They use blockchain and Internet of Things technology to build traceable, transparent food systems because it shouldn't take an investigative journalist to find out where food comes from.
Hello, I'm Kevin with Bytable, and I'm here with Sarah Lloyd, the Director of Special Projects for the Wisconsin Farmers Union. Today, we're going to be talking about the problems that exist in the dairy industry and solutions for the future. Hello, Sarah. Can you tell us a little about yourself and how you got into this profession?
Yeah, sure. So my husband and I are dairy farming with his family. We're in Wisconsin, and we milk about 400 cows. We farm with his family. And I have a background in environmental work, and I also have interest in community and economic development. And so, kind of looking at how farms are important for communities and how farms are important for eaters. And so I work with the Wisconsin Farmers Union, which is an organization that has chapters all over the nation. And in Wisconsin, it was started in 1930. So it's a long-standing organization with a long history of working for family farmers and rural communities.
Great. You're perfect for this topic then. So I got joked about this when I was younger growing up. I'm from a city of 100,000, but to farmers, I was still a city boy. Yeah, but I do think there is a problem sometimes with people that are in cities that there's a disconnect that what's happening out in the farm in the rural communities doesn't affect them, but it very much affects them. And I really want to get your take on that. The first thing is that you spoke last night at the OCM conference, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we went from having 14,000 dairy farms to now we're having around 8,000 in a very quick time. So that means there's more concentration of power, and also there's less money circulating in the rural communities. Can we just start off real quick about why should people care about that? Because I know some people might think, oh, things are getting more efficient, but there's other costs not getting captured in our current economic model.
Yeah, so the numbers you said are correct for Wisconsin. So back in 2007, there were over 14,000 dairy farms. And now I think the last number I saw was actually we've already dipped below 8,000 here in 2019. And that, if you think about, each one of those farms it's a small business. It's buying products from other local businesses. It's spending money in the community for, groceries and other things. And so on one level, it's a little economic engine, each one of the farms. And then also, what we often don't talk about and what doesn't get captured is what is the social impact of losing a business that might have some employees and is actively buying things. And are those people staying in the community? Are they going to the schools? Are they shopping on Main Street? Are they taking part in after school or library programs or the Rotary Club? So I think all of the impacts when you lose the farms really ripples out both socially and economically. And then you just have the issue, one part of those numbers of how many farms have been lost is we haven't reduced our milk production. So we actually, in Wisconsin, have been steadily increasing our milk production. So you mentioned the impact of like concentration, or just fewer farms producing the same, if not more milk. And then what happens in the larger economy is when you go to the grocery store to buy your milk, then there's just more economic power concentrated into fewer actors or people's hands. And from just the history of the United States, we've always thought about competition and fairness and that, many people, sort of economic democracy. And when you get fewer and fewer people with more and more power in the markets, it just tends to, it's not going well. I mean, it's not going well for people. I mean, we can see it in our rural communities. You can see it in the urban communities that the economy is not functioning for people. And that's why, the dairy farmers are going out. The reason we've lost so many of them is because the prices that are being paid to farmers for their milk is not enough for them to run their farms. And so people have to choose to leave dairy farming, and some people are leaving under bankruptcy because it's that dire now. And so it's really the speed at which the dairy farms are going out of business, and you're just seeing fewer, bigger farms is quite dramatic.
Yes, and with that concentration of power that's there, like you said, the lower prices, less money going to the farmer. I think, just to clarify, John Eichert in his speech, he was talking about that a lot of our rural communities, because of these loss of family farms, have some of the same socioeconomic problems of our inner cities because of that. And there was a graphic put up yesterday at the conference that in the 1980s, this might apply to the dairy industry as well, but it used to be about 35 cents of every dollar went to the farmer, and now it's 15 cents going to the farmer. And one thing I just don't understand is that if the farmer's doing most of the hard work, all of that labor, why are they getting less of that overall dollar? Is it because of that concentration of power?
Yeah, I think the reduced farmer share of that consumer dollar has a lot to do with, what people can do in the marketplace. We had, so Wisconsin Farmers Union has been working with a couple dairy economists to kind of look at the numbers. And we asked them, well, because the big concern is like, if the farmers are paid a higher price, that's automatically going to mean that the consumer has to pay a higher price. And obviously, as we said, people in both, like, farmers and consumers are struggling. So, who's going to bear the burden? Right now, the farmers are bearing the burden of not being paid enough for their milk to cover their cost of production. But we asked the economists, and they figured out through a calculation that if you paid farmers $2 more for 100 pounds of milk, so we sell our milk in 100-pound units, 100 weights. If you paid farmers $2 more for that 100 pounds, that if the consumer bore the whole amount of that increase, it would equate to 11 cents for a gallon of milk. And, 11 cents is not insignificant, but the most important thing I want to talk about is why should the consumer actually have to bear that 11 cents? Because we know that the processors and the distributors and the retailers in the case now are getting more than their fair share of the dollar. And everybody needs to make a profit. We need to redistribute the dollars more equally across the system or the supply chain, and say maybe it would have to go up 3 cents for the consumer, and maybe the retailer takes 3 or 4 of those cents, and the distributor and the processor. But we could do this. I mean, there's plenty of money in the marketplace. That's what I always like to say. There's plenty of money in the marketplace that you could really increase farmers' prices to something that is viable for them as people, as businesses. And so that's, really what we're working on.
Yeah, we'll get into the pricing later when we talk about dairy together. But to finish up kind of like the problems that exist in the dairy industry, I wanted to get your take on something. Was that with this concentration of power, the thing I always get concerned with is food safety. Mm-hmm. Now, if there's fewer people in the marketplace that are processing these and also could fix prices, if one of them goes under or if there's an issue, it's just, I just get concerned with that food quality. Is there risk of more recalls because of being mass produced really fast, just commodity prices cheap? I just wanted to get your intake on the food safety aspect of getting more consolidation of power.
Yeah. I think whenever you concentrate all your eggs in one basket, as they might say, you always have that risk that if something goes wrong, then it's gone wrong in a bigger scale. If you just look at some of the lettuce recalls or the cantaloupe, issues in the past, you just think, wow. Or if you see a lot of times like beef recalls now, you just think, wow, like they've identified one source of that issue and they're recalling things in 27 states, or things like that. And so you really start to understand in our food system how we are putting all our eggs in one basket. And I think, I will say for dairy, dairy is very regulated for quality. And I don't think, because it's going through pasteurization at the processor level, like it leaves our farm and then goes to a plant, like most days ours goes to a butter plant, but it's pasteurized there. So I think even in a large plant, it's very heavily regulated as far as like temperatures and things like that. The thing that I worry about, which is a public health issue and is an environmental issue, is as you're seeing fewer and fewer larger and larger farms, you are then concentrating all of the manure from the animals in one place. And that it's inherently risky. When we talk to the people in the industry, they're like, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about. We are so regulated by, the state governments and the federal governments, and we take really good care. It's like, well, you could be as careful as you want, but accidents happen, unexpected things happen. And now you don't have 150 cows worth of poop. You've got 8,000 cows worth of poop. And to me, it's like, that's not worth the risk to me. I mean, we're seeing a lot of issues in Wisconsin with groundwater quality and issues with people's wells being contaminated with poop. Yeah. and so that's the other part of this change towards fewer larger farms, is that I just don't think it's an acceptable risk because, something's going to go wrong.
No, I agree. And that brings us to a good next point, is that our current economy right now, John Eichert brought it up in his speech about there's certain costs that aren't factored in. Like right now, the way the system's set up is, especially with subsidies, is just pumping out those commodities, but there's not really, what is the price of losing your soil? What is the price of damaging the water for everyone? Because right now that's not getting captured, but it should be. It seems very short-sighted. I guess that's something I'd like to bring up is, what are some things we could do do you have any ideas of how we could maybe capture that in the agriculture system?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's correct. We have externalized, those ecological and social considerations. There are some different, I'm sorry. There are different ways that we could do that. I think one of the ways that consumers are probably most used to is, looking for labels, because I mean, well, there's two levels. One thing is that you have the direct relationship, with the farmer. So when you go to a farmer's market, if you're a member of a CSA, if you're going to maybe your local cooperative grocery store that's actually really working to make these relationships kind of for you as a co-op, then you're kind of vetting out the system and shortening the supply chain, because it's going like producer to consumer. And so that more of the money is going to go right to the producer. And you're also able to kind of understand, well, okay, I know what's going on with that farm, or maybe you even go to the farm, so you're seeing it. So the way that we, obviously, like all 3 million people that live in a city, like can't do that, don't have the time to do that. So we use labels to say like, oh, this has these qualities. So people are probably most familiar with the organic label. So, the organic label is, and it's very important that people know, organic label is not telling you anything about how much the farmer's paid. It's not telling you anything about what's going on with the workers. It's not telling you anything about food safety or nutrition. What it is telling you is, okay, these farmers did not use any synthetic pesticides. They did not use antibiotics at all in raising the animal. And there are certain production practices, like with dairy, it used to be that, the cows needed to be out on the grass, on the pasture, eating pasture for a certain amount. So, that's one way. And then we know that in for example, like Organic Valley, that a lot of that premium price, so you're going to pay a higher price in the market as a consumer for that's getting back down to the farmer. But you don't know that for sure. So that, that's the thing that I really encourage people, like, look at labels and think about what you're buying, and, geek out in the grocery store and, try to understand like where everything's from and how it's happening, because that is a way that you as a consumer can, impact like what's going on. But we need more than that, because, having just voting with our dollar is actually not enough, because we do need some bigger changes as to the way that agriculture is functioning and the way that it's formed by the policies that we have, which right now the policies that we have are pushing us into this system of fewer, larger and larger farms. But everyone has a role to play in the solutions. We can be smart consumers and be conscious about what we're doing when we buy these different things. We can take the extra time to go to the farmer's market and make sure that we're shortening the supply. But we also, so that's activity in the markets, but we also need activity in the policy realm to get a thriving agriculture that is considering the environment, that is, leading to vibrant communities. And, that's why I do this work, because I think we can do it. We have the opportunity, but we got to get together and do it together.
I completely agree with everything you just said. The one thing I just wanted to point out for listeners, most farmers, at farmers markets, talk to them, get to know them. They want to share their story, and then buying direct from them is one of the best things you can do. More money gets into their pocket than going through a middleman. So, farmers, I want to be the new rock stars, I forget, someone told me this, but there became TV chefs now. There needs to be TV for yeah, exactly. But I wanted to follow up about policy change. Definitely needs to be enacted, but I always hear for policy change to happen, culture needs to change first. But I know that's not always the case, but I was just wondering, what are some things you're already working on, many things to do it, but high level, what are some things the general public can do to try to change our culture towards enacting these policy changes? Because these are real issues, real problems. Is it just how do we get a great spokesperson out there to be like, hey, this is affecting everyone and it affects the economy?
Yeah, I think people the first thing is get involved. And whenever you see that an elected person, I mean, in this case with the dairy stuff, and we'll talk about it later, we need some federal level change. So, when you look in your newspaper and your Facebook feed and you see, oh, wow, my congressperson is going to be at the library on Thursday afternoon listening. Well, go to that place, because it is actually quite amazing if you're there and you can take the time to be there and say, hey, Mr. Mrs. Congressperson, like, I'm really concerned about our food system. I want good food, but I want to make sure that the farmers in my community can survive, and they need to make a living. They need to get paid a good price so they can make a living. What are you doing about that? I mean, really, just you don't have to know the fine detail, because obviously we all talk about the sausage making that goes on with policy. So don't worry, that you might not have the exact, design of the policy that you want. That's what their job is supposed to be. They're supposed to be the problem solvers that we elected them to be. So, but really just putting that question and talking about how you value good food for you and your family, but you want to make sure that the farmers are not getting the short end of the stick, and just making sure that that's up in their face, because then they can't say, consumers don't really care about this, or and maybe throw in, I'd be willing to pay a couple more cents for my gallon of milk if we all solve this problem together. Mm-hmm. Because that is actually a very common pushback, well, consumers will have to pay more. And you can say, I'm willing to look at that, but I know that farmers need to be paid more. And I'm a consumer, and I want to be together with the farmers and make sure we can all do well. And so you solve the problem. That's your job.
Yeah.
So I think that, calling is helpful. I also think that, even just, so you've got the federal policy. We talked about, what you can do when you go right to the farmer's market, when you go to the grocery store. I also always, talk to the produce manager in the grocery store, talk to the dairy case manager, because if they're think about how weird it would be for them if 3 or 4 people a day start coming into the store and being like, hey, do you know what the deal is with how much they're paying farmers? I'm really concerned about that. What this dairy stuff, do you know where this dairy is coming from? And here's a little fun tip. If you look on your jug of milk, there's a little where it says best by, the date, August 12th or whatever. Right below is a little inkjet code that'll tell you exactly what dairy plant it was made in. And there's a website called where'smymilkfrom.com, and you type in the little code, it has a 2-digit number for the state. So Wisconsin is 55. And then it has a hyphen, and then it'll have a 3 or 4 digit, and that's the plant where it was processed. So you can figure out exactly where your milk came from, and that might also help you figure out, is this coming from my state even? Yeah. So you can, and that's the fun way to geek out in the grocery store.
No, I agree. Because our whole point is with this podcast, not only is to increase health literacy, is to get people thinking about where their food comes from, because there is sometimes people just get caught up on, oh, what are my calories? How much protein am I getting? But not counting the impact on the environment, and then also how everyone was raised, how everyone was treated. But no, those are very good points. One thing I wanted to get to now was your work with the Wisconsin Food Hub. You were talking about, you used the word CSA, and you also said co-op. For our listeners who don't know that, could you just briefly explain those?
Yeah, so one of the groups of farmers that I work with and getting to know are folks doing what's called community supported agriculture, so CSA, and that's most often it's a direct relationship between the eater, the consumer, and the farmer, and you are paying in advance for a season's worth of farm produce. And usually you'll get a weekly box of vegetables. And you might be doing eggs and cheese and meat too, but most of it usually is vegetables. And you are in direct relationship and you get this weekly box. And that is a way, again, to better be in relationship between farmers and eaters, but also you're helping the farmer by ensuring they know what their income is. Because if you think about it, when you go to the farmer's market, think about all the produce that the farmers harvested and washed and gotten to the farmer's market. And then at the end of the day, if it doesn't sell, a lot of times they're going to have to just put it on the compost pile, or maybe they have some pigs, they're going to feed it to the pigs. But if you're a CSA member, then you're locking in that the farmer knows that you're going to get that produce and you've paid for it. And so it can be a way for people to really support the farms. And then, if there's more tomatoes one week and fewer carrots the next, it can actually just flow with what's actually available on the farm. So that's a great model. And if that's something that works for you and you've got people in your area, I really encourage people to check out community supported agriculture as an economic and social cool way to set things up. And then I mentioned cooperative. I was, I think talking about grocery co-ops, but dairy farmers process their milk as a co-op. It's the business that they own together. They're stockholders in it. And that's another way to look at what the economic realities are of the food system, is who's owning the businesses. And as a consumer, you may be able to shop at a grocery cooperative, and then you actually you are part owner or patron of the business, and then it's basically providing the services for the people that are using the services, and it's owned by those people. So that's, another indicator of kind of how the economy is working for people. I mean, I want to make a caveat, a lot of co-ops for farmers are not treating their farmers very well. Oh. So it's not, again, sadly, there isn't that one thing that's you still got to do your homework, and we have to be vigilant, as people in these different relationships. So, but I think, if you don't know much about the history of co-ops, and you should do a whole other podcast on that, because it's really important, Yeah. And I think there's a resurgence because people know that the economy is not working for people, and they're looking for, how would we fix it? How would we restructure it? And looking at ownership, who really owns it? Who's making the decisions about what's going on?
Can you just talk briefly about the Wisconsin Food Hub Cooperative?
Yeah, so the Wisconsin Food Hub.
One of the good ones.
Yes. We hope. We're working on that, definitely. The Wisconsin Food Hub Cooperative was founded by a small group of Wisconsin vegetable farmers back in 2012, and the Wisconsin Farmers Union. And the whole reason of founding the co-op was just how can farmers more easily get their product to market? Because you had a lot of folks that maybe were doing farmers markets or CSAs or farm stands, either at their farm or maybe somewhere in town where people could come by and buy sweet corn and tomatoes and things. But then how do we sort of take it up to the next level? Because we had a lot of farmers who maybe they had relationships with 5 grocery stores. And so they would go to each grocery store and drop off their, 10 cases of this or a a bin of pumpkins or things like that. But then the farmer then has to be like the farmer and the salesperson and the delivery person. And so the idea with the co-op is that as a group of farmers, they would pool their investment together. And then instead of having everybody showing up at the back door of the grocery store, which also the grocery store people are like, there's, I got 40 different farmers dropping off one box of this, is that it all would come together. And then the co-op provides the service of the sales, but then also even just the transactions of like billing the grocery store and getting the payment. Because if you have been in business or even just in your daily life, like chasing payments. And so anyways, the co-op is doing that for the farmers. And so we have 50 farm members now. We're selling into Chicago, Milwaukee, across Wisconsin, grocery stores, restaurants, through some distributors. So yeah, it's going well. It's difficult. It's perishable product on a low margin, but that's what we're trying to solve together. So it's a good thing. And look for food hubs in your area. There's a lot, and a lot of them are working on different models, but it's a good. It's a necessary part of helping farmers and eaters connect, but like through the standard way, like going to the grocery store, or going to just a normal restaurant. So,
and one thing I just wanted to add with that, just from my experience going to certain CSAs, because some of them also you can go visit and they'll have events there too, where they cook and it's from food grown right there. It's fresh and it's awesome. It's some of the best food you'll ever have because it's fresh and it's community.
Yeah, look for events, around. A good friend of mine has a wildly successful pizza on the farm. And, they're raising all the tomatoes for the tomato sauce and the mushrooms and all the veggies. And then even they're raising the pigs that is made into the sausage for the pizza. And plus you're like sitting outside hanging out, and they even started brewing their own beer now.
Nice.
And so there is a lot of cool, and I think that's if you're just starting out with this and just thinking like, well, how can I do this? Scan your newspaper, Google, farm events, and try that out because they're super fun and tasty.
Yeah, and one thing I'm really excited about in the future, one of our previous podcasts, Gary Siegworth brought this up. He works for the Iowa DNR, but his vision for the future, he said he kind of wanted to see farmers boom, kind of like the craft brew movement, about how like there's craft brew everywhere. And I think we're kind of going there because I'm seeing more and more of these events. So definitely check those out. They're a lot of fun. But one thing to wrap it up, two things to wrap it up, but one thing for sure is I wanted to talk about your Dairy Together. Now, this is probably the most impactful thing we could get policy going with, or to change prices so farmers have living wages. Can you just talk about that and how we as consumers can help?
Yeah.
Or just advocates?
Yeah. So with this price crisis for dairy right now, we talked at the beginning about the just big loss of dairy farms due to the fact that people are not getting paid a price that's covering their cost of production, allowing them to support the business and their families. So we know that these really big changes that we need, because the federal government is highly involved in the way that dairy products are priced to the farmer, like the price that's paid to the farmer. And so we have to have the federal government make changes to do it. If we didn't have to go through them, believe me, we would avoid that. But what we need strong voices, and we need to bring the farm community, the dairy farm community, together in a large voice and make some noise, because it's getting really bad. But we need to punch through like all the other issues and voices that may not have an interest in paying farmers a living wage or living price. So what we've been doing is Wisconsin Farmers Union, other state farmers unions, National Farmers Organization, even OC, Organization of Competitive Markets, whose conference we're at right now, coming together and we've been touring and having meetings around the U.S. with farmers. We've been looking at different models for policy and what would it look like? What would produce the most equitable results? And then starting to talk to, okay, who would be the congressperson or the senator that would introduce the bill? Can we all get around it? And then we also have the opportunity. We are having a lot of debate in the 2020 presidential. We are hearing most about the Democratic primary right now, but obviously then the Democratic person will be presumably challenging Trump, or, if Trump doesn't run, then a Republican, and there may be other party candidates. So we want the dairy price crisis, because of the issues for farmers, for rural communities, what it means for our food system and the food that consumers have available. We need this to be like a number one issue in the presidential debates. And so what we're doing with Dairy Together is looking at the actual policy solutions, but most of all, bringing the broadest set of people around the table to push for a better system. And so we invite you to join the farmers in solidarity, in coalition. And I think for consumers right now, the biggest thing is, we talked about it earlier, if you have an opportunity or take the opportunity to call your congresspeople, your senators, and say, hey, what are you doing? We know our farmers are in crisis. You need to solve this problem. We need to figure out how they can be assured a price that will allow them to have a viable business and a living wage for their household. So that's a big thing. Dairytogether.com has all the background information. There's a lot of short videos and things that try to explain. Some of them are a little wonky, but we're working on, mixing up the content so that, some of it is kind of that fine level detail, but others of it is just explaining, because, in a sense, it's not complicated. Farmers just need a decent price for their product. And there's a lot of ways that the federal government completely impacts the way that pricing happens. So, and why aren't the processors and branded dairy products, why aren't they right up there with us on the barricade saying, hey, we need farms to be able to survive. Mm-hmm. So we do need consumers. We're also looking for other retailers, processors, people that sell things to farmers, like the people that sell tractors. Well, they're getting into a bad situation because there's fewer and fewer farmers, and the farmers that are left want these bigger and bigger and bigger things. But a lot of these suppliers would do better if they had more clients, more customers rather than fewer. So we called the campaign Dairy Together, just very simply to say we got to do this together and we need all hands on deck. So I encourage folks to check out the information, ask questions. Wisconsin Farmers Union is always open to that. There's a lot of states have farmers unions. We're heading out to Washington, D.C. as a group of farmers in the second week of September to talk as a group to our elected officials about this and show up. So there's, I think, putting the voice out there. If people are on social media, it always helps if people are retweeting things or sharing things, because I think for consumers, if they're starting to go into a little bit more detail to understand stuff, if they can help inform their friends and family, and we know now these days, that's where people get their info, is it'd be helpful. And so, dig in with us. We need everybody's help. So, yeah.
Great. Is there anything else you want to leave the listeners with? Any big takeaway?
Big takeaway. I think that we have a real opportunity right now. I mean, we are in this position where we're seeing how not paying attention to what the structures look like, just allowing for things to concentrate and it didn't happen on accident. There's a lot of powerful forces that were shaping, like, oh, wow, I'm a Wall Street bigwig. I can make more money if there's more, like just a couple gigantic farms and not a bunch of small independent business people operating. So, we're going to have to work to unravel the bad system that's been formed and remake it the way that we can. But we are in an opportunity point right now, because I think more and more people are tuning in to try to figure out, hey, this is not working for me. I'm not getting good food. I don't like, what's going on with it. But it is, there's an urgency in it too, because we don't want to go beyond the point of no return.
Exactly.
And, there are certain, if you look at the other agricultural sectors, dairy has not been as concentrated as like pork and poultry and other things. And for all the different reasons, dairy still was like kind of dispersed ownership, lots of farms operating independently. And now we're going that same direction. And it's also something that you see, and consolidation in the economy that's in other places, not just ag. So it's all happening. Mm-hmm. And so it's time to, get engaged so we don't go past the tipping point.
Agreed. I couldn't say it any better. One fun question to end this.
Oh, yes.
You're from Wisconsin.
Yes.
I've been to Wisconsin so many times, being in Iowa. What's your favorite cheeses?
Oh my gosh. We do have an embarrassment of riches. There are so many, but here's this one. Okay, there's a woman named Marika, and I don't know her last name. I should. She's Dutch, but she moved to Wisconsin and has this great cheese plant. She makes all these Gouda cheeses, and then she's got some with like different spices in them. So there's like a cumin or maybe a fennel, but then there's this one. It's fenugreek, which is like a herb, and it's in the Gouda. And I'm telling you, it's so good. And I think it's Marika's fenugreek. It's very good. Look for that. I think she has wider distribution, but maybe not of that particular cheese. So you're going to have to come to Wisconsin. And you can go right to her cheese plant. There's like Pleasant Ridge Reserve is this really great, like Gruyere style. Of course, it's not Gruyere, but it's a Wisconsin's. And that's very good. Oh my gosh. Car Valley cheese has this, like, they have a great Gorgonzola, like a blue cheese that's fabulous. I'm the person that, it's great when I go to family gatherings and stuff, I just bring like my favorite cheeses. And everyone thinks it's so great, these cheeses, but I didn't do any of that work. And, here's like my mother-in-law's making this amazing turkey or casserole, and I like show up with these cheese, and people are like, oh, cheese, Sarah brought the cheese. I'm like, yeah, that's good, because I can just know which ones are super tasty.
No, that's very common. And honestly, there's so many places in Wisconsin, because you listed off a bunch that I didn't know. And I'm like, I can name 15 more.
Oh, yeah. No, we do a good job.
Just wanted to thank you very much for joining us. This was very enlightening, and hopefully we can get more people to go to dairy together and talk to their Congress people and try to get change.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We'd like to remind our audience that the views of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Bytable or of our staff personally. The purpose of the Bytable podcast is to encourage spirited dialogue around topics like food, nutrition, animal and human welfare, and the food system. Part of having an open and spirited dialogue is accepting that others have views that are different than ours and working to understand how their experiences have differed from our own. We encourage all listeners to do their own research on any and all topics discussed during the show. That being said, we hope you enjoyed the podcast and thanks for listening.